So I'm so excited to have you on the podcast. I think that your story, just from the little that I know about it, it's one that people really resonate with in this time. I think it's just, a lot of people are struggling with similar things. And so to have somebody's experience of coming back from that is really, really important. And it's kind of a guiding light for a lot of people in these situations. So yeah, I'm excited to hear the story and all the details. And you know Leo, it sounds like.
No, I know of a couple. I watched a couple of your prior
Okay.
videos, and I know of a couple.
Okay.
But I don't know them personally. As far as
Okay. Okay. Awesome. Well, I'm so happy that we were able to get in touch. And yeah, we'd love to just start from the beginning and hear the story.
Okay, well, I'm a little bit older than than some of your. Well, I guess I'm in a similar age to Leo and the other guys. But what happened for me when I left, I was a similar age to the people you're, 20s and 30s is I think is a more common age to be struggling with this right now. Anyway, let me step all the way back. So I grew up in a very faithful home. Both parents engaged and totally committed to the gospel, and they raised 8 kids, and it was a huge, you've heard this 1,000 times. By the way, that's something I'm recognizing. I think a lot of us are tripped up and struggle and leave for some of the same reasons. So the departure is very common. It can be a very common story, but the return can be very unique. And that's why I think what you're doing is really good, because to share the stories of how and why people are coming back, I think is important and will be helpful to people. Anyway, so grew up in a very gospel-focused family. Both my parents were converts as teenagers, but we were all born in the church, and very good parents. To this day, I have no complaints. My dad in particular was a priesthood leader, and he worked for the church educational system, CES, seminaries and institutes. And as a result, he was very educated on, he studied church history and scripture history and ancient religions and so forth. So we got a lot of that in our upbringing, a lot of scripture-based learning, which was good. Anyway, so I pursued the typical route that you've heard a million times. I went to college and then went on a mission. In those days, we were 19, and I served an honorable mission, as they say. I went to Italy, and wasn't perfect, but did the best I could. Came back, went to BYU, and then in my studies, I was very focused on the quantitative type stuff, very measurable, true or false kind of things, numbers and facts and statistics and so forth. So that became a focus in how I deliberately tried to train my brain to focus and approach things in that way. And then I remember very clearly at about age 26, I want to say 26, 27, reading a book by some local guy. At this point, my wife and I at the time lived in Utah County, and it was called, I think it was Mormon Polygamy. And I just picked it up and read it. And some of the accounts in that, I remember being exposed for the first time to what were said to be some facts around Joseph Smith and polygamy. And I remember being just absolutely stunned, like a kick to the chest, almost losing my breath. Everything I had ever believed in and built my life around was challenged in that moment. And because, I guess looking back, the best way to characterize it, the challenge was, it just seems impossible that a prophet, supposed prophet of God, would behave as alleged in the book, right? So that triggered my appetite and interest. I had to get some kind of resolution. And this was in I want to say the mid 90s. And so we didn't have access to the internet like we do today, but we had a thing called public libraries. And so I literally, it's working full time, but I would literally spend hours and hours every weekend, sometimes evenings, at the library, first at the closest library, and then up and down the Wasatch Front, looking for more materials. And I just consumed it at a high rate. And then I can't say exactly when, but it's very strange. It's very hard, I believe now, it's very hard to maintain an objective point of view, like a really honest truth pursuit. And we all tell ourselves we are, but I think it's very hard because we have so much vested one way or another. But at some point, it turned to where instead of trying, like I guess I'd been trained to do, to see all the evidences and I guess convince myself that the church was true, the gospel's true, it became just the opposite. And like so many people, I was still going through the motions early on. So I remember going to church and going in Sunday school and literally taking notes down about why I didn't believe and why this was ridiculous and why that was ridiculous. And looking through scriptures, for example, the Joseph Smith translation and so forth, but sitting in church and doing precisely the opposite of what I had done before that. So I think that's an important point, is how difficult it is to find good sources and to maintain an honest, sincere, we're all emotional beings and we're affected. And like I said, I was really affected by my first encounter. And so that became, that was a very significant moment, a turning point, even though I can't recount for you exactly when that was. But through this, and this is an important part of my story, is again, I had decided that I had to approach things very rationally and logically and almost quantitatively, where things had to add up. And if they didn't in my brain, then it wasn't good enough. It wasn't going to survive. It was strictly an intellectual pursuit. And it failed. In my view, everything I'd been taught just fell apart. And I've described it this way. It's like this edifice or fortress I built, I took apart brick by brick by brick by brick, right? And I remember, again, still going through the motions, sitting in, for example, a sacrament meeting and just thinking to myself, looking around at the congregation and thinking, wow, I can't believe people still believe this. You know what it is? I think I know something. This is it. I know something these people don't know. I just know too much. That was kind of my thinking. I know too much to continue to believe in this. That's an important point. I think I'll get back to in a bit. But these people, clearly, they're either not that bright or there's just things they don't know. Otherwise, it's just not possible to continue. Now, so I completely lost all faith and all belief. And as you hear very often too, you pull that thread, that strand, and it further unravels everything to the point where you don't believe in God. I did not believe in God. It was 99% sure everything was bogus, everything spiritual, everything religious I'd been taught, along with every other religion, was just as wacky to me. Because again, it had failed my rigorous intellectual examination, which is, I came to find, was very silly way to approach things. Now, throughout this time, I remember I mentioned my dad was a seminaries and institute guy and a very well researched scriptorian. And so not right away, but within a year or so, I was very honest with him and told him where I was. And I was the only one I'm in the middle of the 8 kids, but I was the only one to leave. And I never took my names off the records, right? I didn't see the need. It's kind of a social thing. And I'd like to continue to see my family. And that was important. We still had a very good relationship through all that. And there are lessons to be learned from that, in my view. Anyway, throughout all this, I would speak regularly to my dad, who lived in California, and at least probably weekly phone calls. And I would pose questions to him, and there was no better source to get answers if you really wanted answers. But again, I think I wasn't really looking for answers. I was looking to knock down anything that could tell me I was on the wrong path. But I remember saying to him some important phrases, some important words. I just remember thinking, and he had this hope and faith, I'm sure, that one day I'd come around. And I thought that was totally condescending, and that part bothered me. But I would come around, and I remember telling him, Dad, there's just too much contrary evidence, contradictory evidence. It's just, and I use these phrases, a mountain of evidence between me and every seeing through this mountain, let alone getting around it or getting through it to come back to faith. And particularly the temple, not in a billion years would I think I'd ever go back to the temple again. I just said, it's impossible. The mountain of garbage that I can't get through, it's just impossible. Well, through this, he, as a father would, as a parent would, did the best he could, but he told me several times, if you continue on this path, you are going to lose everything. And I hated that. That really bothered me because it kind of rattled around in my head. I hated to hear that. That really was irritating and again, condescending. It's like, wait, I see countless people who live secular lives and do their own thing and they do just fine, you know. But his position was, no, where much is given, much is required, and you're going to lose everything. Long story short, a lot of people the Book of Mormon tells us a lot of people come to humility on their own. Others have to be forced there. I was one of the latter, and he was exactly right. My life, my small family, had 3 kids, and was doing well professionally, absolutely collapsed. Lost my family, in effect, fell apart through divorce. Financially was devastated, and this went on for some period. And at that point, I was living by force, living around my family in the same town, and happened to be in the same, geographically, the same ward as my dad, who was a bishop at the time, the bishop. So he was technically my bishop.
Quick question for you.
Yeah.
What was your now ex-wife? What was her thought? I mean, this whole time you're going through this,
Yeah.
like, was she on the same train as you? Was she going, like, what was that like?
She was not especially engaged. She kind of followed my lead in it, but a lot of people are like this too, and I often do admire it. She didn't have the same kind of hangups I did intellectually, I guess, but she I'm sure was weakened by me. In whatever way I had strengthened her prior to that in the first years, I unraveled all that and undermined all of that. And to this day, this is years, like a couple decades later, she's still not, part of the church. So she kind of followed me up and down. If that makes sense.
Got it. Okay,
so
move back into your word.
Yeah. So life was very hard, and the grindiest, most torturous period of my life to that point. Living with my kids, but then alone, as that works, and just having an awful time of it. But again, close to my family, which in retrospect was a huge blessing. And I remember being asked, "Do you want a priesthood blessing?" And I said to me, and I think I said no. Well, I know I said no, but I'm thinking, why in the world would I, so I wasn't quite to the point where I needed to be. Anyway, so this goes on, and there's lots of details around kind of the trial and the furnace that I was in personally. But at some point, because I had to move and do things, I came across my old scriptures for, the quadruple, I think it was a 4-in-1, and scriptures I hadn't touched in years. So kind of dusted them off, so to speak. And I said, on a whim, 1% hope, 99% cynicism, and just why not? Flop them open. You've heard this, the people talk about doing the same thing. I think I've seen a person or two in your podcast who's done something similar. And I just let it fall open, and I read 14 words. My eyes were drawn to 14 words, no more, no less. And they were, you have not applied your hearts to understanding, therefore you have not been wise, which stung me and hit me struck me very powerfully. But I left it at that, and I just pondered on that and let that kind of work itself through me. You have not applied your heart to understanding. No, I've applied my brain to understanding. Things have to stack up. They have to add up. You have not applied your heart to understanding, therefore you have not been wise. Well, I knew I hadn't been wise, because you don't end up in those situations unless you've been unwise, right? So I let that kind of work on me for a bit. And it did soften me a little bit. I think that just opened the door just a half inch of daylight. Say, okay, I'm going to go to church. It's my dad's ward, it's my family's ward, my parents' ward. And the night before, Saturday night, trying to fall asleep, I had this feeling, the countless things you're taught as a kid come back to you. So many of them never leave. Faith precedes the miracle, right? And in so many ways, I was looking for what would amount to a miracle. That is getting some kind of rescue financially too, because I was sitting still. At that point, I had effectively lost my employment and was just spending down savings. It was very stressful, spending down savings. And as I tried to go to sleep that night, I thought of that faith precedes a miracle. And I thought, and then a thought came to me, you have to pay tithing. I was like, I'm not, no, not yet. I don't know. You have to pay tithing. And that kind of, I wrestled with that and I couldn't go to sleep. And I said, okay. Oh, well, when I get another job, I'm going to pay tithing. Okay. So when I earn some money, I'm going to pay tithing. Satisfied myself with that, tried to go back to sleep, and I couldn't. I said, faith precedes the miracle. And like a thought came to me, again, one comes before the other. You have to pay tithing before. What? You have to pay tithing before you receive. I can't. I have finite amount of savings. I'm burning through it every day. That's the most painful thing I can think of. But the thought wouldn't leave me alone. So I determined, seriously in frustration, all right, I'm going to write a check. I'm going to hand it to the bishop, my dad, tomorrow. And I thought the further thought came to me, you need to think about the new position. I was in finance and tech a little bit. And what kind of job do you want? How much is it going to pay? And so I said, it's going to pay this. And so my monthly tithing will be this amount. And so I wrote a check for that amount, the monthly tithing calculation, and I gave it to my bishop. And I've been trying for 4 months to find a new job. The tech bubble had just popped. Anyway, well, that long story short, this following is all true. That Monday, I got a call from someplace I'd forgotten about, a tech company in Seattle, that asked me if I could fly up the next day for an interview. And great, I hadn't heard any positive responses. So went back up, did the series of interviews, came back down, and by Wednesday, I had an offer for the new job at exactly the amount of salary that I had calculated would necessitate that tithing amount. And I was very much humbled at that time, and I'm sure I was tearful. And it was somewhat of a step up for me too, even from my past. And I was just overwhelmed. And then later and they told me there would be a bonus, a signing bonus, and some other things I didn't expect. And then I got a call that Friday, and it was an administrator from the new company, and they said, "Where do we send the wire?" I said, "What wire?" Well, we also, in addition to the signing bonus, we just pay you a fixed amount, a move bonus too. It's going to come. And again, I was surprised and kind of overwhelmed. And the scripture came to me that the windows of heaven would open, right? And it would be more than you can receive, or at least more than you expected, for sure. And that definitely was the case. Now, obviously, there's a lot more to the story, a lot more details, but this was a period that kind of tenderized me. And it had been years. I've been away intellectually, for sure, and spiritually, a non-believer for 6 years at least, maybe 7. And so this period continues, and I put one baby step in front of the other. And so often you end up taking steps more quickly than you want to, or bigger leaps than you want to. But after a year or two, this is where these conversations with my dad comes in too, how the scriptures do actually teach. They have far more meaning than we can possibly imagine. That's always the case, but also we can be taught so much from them. I read in the New Testament in Matthew, like I had so many times before, a scripture of Jesus himself speaking. But before I share that, let me just, I failed to kind of characterize how I think I grew up in those days in the 70s and 80s and stuff, where we had a superhuman view, I did, of prophets, what a prophet is, right? And very immature, even as a young adult, almost like a comic book hero, right? They can leap a building in a single bound, faster than a speeding bullet. These are the things I think. And that's why it was so devastating to see that, gosh, this guy at best was just a human, you know? But I'd always read a scripture. I'd always heard the notion of a faith. Even if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can move mountains. And if you go, to refresh my memory, just before we got on today, I went back and looked at the topical guide, and it says move. That's the word, move mountains. But at the time, whenever that came up as a kid, I always thought, well, that's cool. That's like faster than a speeding bullet, right? I could move a mountain and show the world or something. I don't know. But it did occur to me, why in the world would you need to move a mountain? That seems kind of super, okay. Again, this is in the arena of superheroes. Well, the scripture that I read apparently for the first time, or somebody had changed it, was Matthew 17:20. And I'm going to read it for you real quick, if that's okay. And it's Jesus speaking about that mustard seed. And unlike what I thought it had said, this is Matthew 17:20. It said, and Jesus said unto them, because of your unbelief, he skips on, for verily I say unto you, if you have faith as a grain of mustard seed, you shall say unto this mountain, remove hence to yonder place, and it shall remove, and nothing shall be impossible unto you. And again, my plea or my claim to my dad was, there is a mountain between me and ever believing again.
That is so,
and it's impossible, Dad. It's impossible. But Jesus said, you will remove mountains and it will be possible. Everything will be possible. And so I asked today, why in the world would you ever need to remove a mountain? And I know why. I'm one person who knows why that scripture is super meaningful. I don't know why it says in the topical guide, it says move, but that was significant to me and was very meaningful, obviously, for those reasons, because all my conversations with my dad and my family were very sharp and vivid in my memory. So that was a big deal. I came to some conclusions that I think are helpful. And like you, I've tried to be open and talk to people, especially younger people, my kids' generation, and my nieces and nephews, and there are a lot of them. And lots of them have struggles like this. And so if you don't mind, I can share a couple observations from all this.
I would love that. Please.
Okay. Yeah. Imagine for a second, you encounter or you hear of an expert in history, a music expert. This is my analogy. I don't know. It works for me. And he knows everything there is to know about Mozart. He knows Mozart like nobody else on the planet. He knows everything about his personal history, about him as a human being, about his intellect, about his musical style, everything about his music too, how it came to him, how he composed it, how he expressed it on paper. He knows how many measures, how many notes, of which kind, everything there is to know about Mozart. He is the expert. He spent his life in that pursuit. He knows all there is to know. And then you ask him, okay, what's your favorite, listening to Mozart, what's your favorite symphony or whatever piece? And you come to find out he's never listened to a single note. He's never listened to Mozart, never heard it, never experienced it. What would you think of this expert? Does he really know Mozart? Of course not. He doesn't know Mozart. I had pursued, in my pursuit, and really trying to get to the truth of things spiritual, right, and eternal and transcendent, I had taken the same route as this hypothetical Mozart expert. I knew everything there was to know, but I knew absolutely nothing. And that's where that kind of pursuit took me, to an absolute dead end that disconnects you from all the good stuff, everything that's meaningful about the gospel. It's a total contradiction. It makes no sense. It's another stupid analogy I use. It's like you talk to a guy with a metal detector, one of the old guys on the beach goes through the sand looking for valuables with a metal detector. And he comes back to you and he tells you conclusively that there's no plastic under the sand. You say, well, you're okay, but you're using a metal detector. Yeah, but I can tell you, because he tells you all, my metal detector is this brand, it's so powerful. Okay, but it's the wrong tool for your pursuit. It wouldn't be compelling. So that's how I feel so much now when I hear, and I engage a lot of people who have a lot of knowledge accumulated about church history and doctrine and stuff. Because I did too. Yeah, you're right. You're right, but it doesn't make you an expert. And so I think that's a really important, at least for me, the people and people like me, I think, reminder is you got to have the right tool for the right application. And the old expression, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So you must use a hammer. You can't. This is not an arena where you can use that particular hammer. And that was very helpful, a way for me to kind of reframe my thinking and a new approach to it, and to come back to earth and picture myself again in a congregation and go, no, I wasn't right. It's not about a lack of intelligence or lack of knowledge. I didn't know too much. And I think somebody in one of your other podcasts said the same thing. Maybe it was his church historian, Dan. You actually, and what I've told young people that I've talked to these days is, it's great, you know a lot, but your problem is still, you don't know enough. Just enough to basically do yourself damage, but there's so much more to know. And I'm able to testify basically that I felt like I knew a whole bunch about Joseph Smith. He was the focus, and everything you've heard around it, the CES letter and everything, that's all ground that's covered, that I covered in a different way, and all about that. But where was I going with that? I know I'm able to testify to them as I say, that's great. How much you know? Know more. Let's know more. I know far more, hopefully, just by passage of years, right? Far more than I did at 30. Yet somehow, some way, I have never been more convinced that Joseph Smith, for everything he was actually also a prophet. He was clearly, to me, he was a prophet. I've never been more convinced of it. How is that possible? I know today far more of the details, not all of them pretty, so somehow, some way, you're on this journey, but there's more to know. Another observation, if I may, again, focused on prophets and how that really hung me up. It was so brittle. It was like my testimony was brittle. And one, like you ding a piece of glass and the whole thing shatters. That was my problem, part of my problem. I've come to a completely different conception of what a prophet is. Again, I talked about him like so naively as kind of a superhero character. And then you get, fortunately, the passage of time, we get older and we experience more, and you see things, you realize, man, everybody is human. Everybody's on their own mortal journey, scraping and scrapping and fighting and kicking just to survive in this mortal world spiritually, and figure out inspiration and overcome themselves and their natural man. Maybe that's how prophets are too. And so, again, logic doesn't have to be thrown out the window. You got to apply logic. And so many times I've gone back and read Joseph's account, his first account, representation of what a prophet is, at least for the scripture he produced. So even look at it cynically, even say Joseph is making it all up. Okay, what was the prophet that he first introduced us to? Go back to to the Book of Mormon, the first chapters. Lehi, supposedly a prophet, he gets this fantastical inspiration. His family has to leave and go on this hard journey. I joke that I often identify with Laman and Lemuel because we forget how hard it was. These guys were leaving their inheritance. Call it even a fictional story. Okay, again, we're being cynical. These characters are leaving, and this prophet, their dad, tells them, "We got up and going. You guys are never, however old you are, whatever you've anticipated your whole lives. Sorry, we're going into the wilderness. Okay, Dad, this is such a huge sacrifice, but we'll trudge along. We'll pack up all our stuff. We'll go, I think, like 100 miles on foot or whatever." And when they get there, and then Dad, within a few days, says, "Hey, boys, you know what? We got to go. You got to go back because we need these scriptures." "Dad, why didn't you tell us?" "Okay, this is really hard, but we're going to do it." And it was a bumpy road, so to speak, going back and everything they went through with Nephi and being kind of humiliated by him, I think, on occasion, and doing that whole horrible thing, and then coming back. "Oh, we survived, Dad, prophet, our dad's a prophet." And then he has another realization. "Guess what? We need you to go make that round trip again. That's brutal. You got to have wives in the wilderness." I can imagine thinking, you're a prophet. You didn't see this from the beginning. Prophets know stuff. A prophet, Dad, would have known when we left. Go negotiate the plates. Go talk to Ishmael. Get us some, whatever you think we're going to have. Why didn't you do this in the first place? What kind of prophet doesn't have his ducks in a row and can't see these simple things? That's the question. And my answer is a real one, a human one that has his own struggles and had to talk his wife into it, convince his wife, let's say, and the other kids, and get past his own desires and stumble and really get to the core of what's inspiration. Am I kidding myself? A real prophet. That's the answer. A guy with all the flaws that we have who's trying to work out his own salvation. Anyway, that's a tiny example. There's lots more of that. How I had to change my thinking. And I think we all should, I think, of what a prophet is. He's in this journey with us, doing the best he can. And it's all, like I said, and this, I hated being condescended to by people patting me on the head saying, "Oh, we always knew you'd come around," right? So that's an aversion I had. It's like, you kind of bristle at that a little bit, but it's true. But I also like to say, just again, getting older, you see, another example, we expect a prophet to know everything. Sorry, they don't. They know what, I think they're inspired and receive revelation on a need to know basis. I think of attorneys and doctors. And when you're a naive young kid, you think, "Oh, I have a brother who's an attorney and a brother who's a doctor." You think, "Oh, he's an attorney. He knows everything there is to know about the law." But try that. I encourage anybody to try that out. Go ask an attorney an obscure question about tax law or whatever. They will have no idea. Why? Because they don't need to know. Mm-hmm. They know what they need to know. Same thing with a doctor. They typically they specialize. Go ask a doctor some obscure, unrelated to what his narrow focus is. Odds are he'll have no idea. Similarly, Lehi's call, or President Nelson's call, is not, he doesn't have to know everything about everything. They have to know what they need to know. And on top of that, they're human beings. And like we see from Joseph's very first presentation of what a prophet is, there's, just like the rest of us, there's trial and error, there's zigging and zagging, there's doing the best they can and figuring it out. And the lesson I draw from that too is, in a very narrow sense, I'm sure Laman and Lemuel were right. They were technically right. They were correct a lot of the time. But more broadly, in the big picture, they were dead wrong. They could have just bailed. And they would have avoided some of the zigging and zagging, maybe, but they would have been lost, right? And the Nephi type had to go, who decided, I'm going to have faith and I'm going to go with it. I'm going to stick with the prophet. I'm going to follow his lead. Maybe through zigging and zagging. I don't know what that means exactly, but I just know that they're not perfect. And boy, you're far better off. I'm far better off to hitch myself to the prophet once I know he's a prophet and stick with him, and not to worry about the little details that we can quibble about. And sometimes who knows, you might be right. Like I said, I think they were right at times, but who cares, you know? And I also compare my relationship sometimes with the gospel, or at least the church, to a marriage, where a lot of your criticisms may very well be true. But so what? Do you want to be right, or do you want to be happy? You know, do you want to progress? Do you want to have fulfillment? Do you want to be saved, as it relates? You know, do you want to be exalted? Yeah. That I try to reframe my thinking in that way. Sure, there's going to be things to complain about, but just like in a marriage, whatever you focus on is amplified, is, you know, it's magnified. And we're all human beings on this mortal journey. And so it's so important where we place our focus, where we put our focus. One more observation, and then we can do whatever you want. We can discuss anything else. In my day, sounds like a really old guy, but there was this sense that, oh, that's anti-Mormon information, don't go there, right? You can't do that. Now, I think that may have had some merit to it back then, because it's so hard to get information. But when young people that I work with, or in my family, whatever, I say, let's not. So it felt like in those days they were kind of grabbing you by the back of the collar and pulling you back. Oh, don't go there, go here. Instead of doing that, metaphorically, I would suggest putting our arm around them and saying, okay, let's go look at that. Let's go further. Don't just stop there and get tangled up in this. Let's use this information. We're trying to use information to get to the truth. But there's always more to know. There's always more to the story. There's always more context. So figuratively putting our arms on their shoulders and saying, yeah, that's troubling, or that's hard to figure out. Let's do it together. Let's push through it. There's a mountain of good stuff too. Let's go through it. And I encourage you to get more information, not less. And so much of what I see online and elsewhere is that, and we're all just human, but you do get a certain sense of pride, of debate. Going back to my day, I didn't actively wage like an anti-Mormon war battle at all, because I really loved my family. That was huge. And we maintain a great relationship through it. And there were lessons from that too. But that said, I did take a lot of, I think, some satisfaction and pride in showing how smart I was, how much more I knew. And you don't know what I know. And showing my clever arguments. So I did some damage, I know, at the ground level, friends and loved ones and so forth. And there was some accounting for that. But fortunately today, I'm grateful I never had my name removed, my records. I'm grateful I never attended whatever they attend. I don't know, rallies and not rallies, you know what I mean? I'm glad I didn't actively campaign against the church, at least. But I did in my heart, I did in my mind, you know, and I did on a small scale to those around me. But I think more, believe it or not, a person who's questioning, more information, not the first stage, but more information is actually super helpful, and it's necessary if you're in that place, it is necessary. And like I said earlier, I do admire people like my wife today, for example. She has a beautiful faith. It's not ignorant, it's not naive. She's just smart enough, I think, not to worry about the small dumb stuff, you know. And that's not to minimize it, because for her it's small dumb stuff, right? To maybe you and me and others, it's not, you know. When you're kicked in the solar plexus, like I said, well, that became important. Okay, so there's a balance to be had there too. So if somebody back then, when I was, like I said, 26, 27, and reeling from that had said, well, that's not important, that wasn't going to work for me. You know, we all pursue truth in our unique ways. We're made differently, and that has to be respected. But I think for somebody who maybe a little bit pridefully, definitely I was prideful, who's thinking they're just in possession of next level information, that you can't dismiss it. You can't say it's not important. I have another analogy that helps me as it relates to this.
Got good analogies.
Well, my wife, I'll be honest, she sometimes hates my analogies, especially if we ever argue, so we try not to argue. But there's a linguist, kind of philosopher guy named Steven Pinker out there in the secular world, brilliant Harvard guy. And he talks about the acquisition of knowledge, how at some levels, it's actually counterproductive. You hit dead ends because you don't go to the next level. And he uses the example in grammar. And it is as follows. I remember as like a fourth grader saying, hey, to a friend, you and me should go play after school. You and me. And your fourth grade English teacher would teach you correctly, say, no, say you and I. You're like, oh, okay. I don't know if that's fourth grade or fifth grade, whatever, but you slowly start to learn, I'm going to get more sophisticated in my language and my grammar. I say you and I. Okay. Well, for a lot of us, that's the end of the lesson. Bang, you're there. And this is what Steven Pinker talks about in one of his books. I don't remember which, but there's a next level beyond that. And so picture this. Today, you'll hear people say, adults, all of us, and this is just used as a simple example. Somebody will say, yeah, just between you and I, because and he says this, they remember that lesson. They remember that additional information. And they even take a little bit of comfort and pride, and I didn't foul it up and say it like I would have in fourth grade. I said you and I, because the truth is, it's actually you and me, just between you and me. Point is, there's a next level. And unfortunately, so many of us, I know I was at that level with respect to church history, and I figured it out. And you guys are wrong to say you and me. There's a next level. And unfortunately, so many of us, for a time, I did stop at that level. And I see that in play in people researching the church. They just learn enough to say you and I. And that's right. I guess it's right. It is right in a lot of instances, but it's not the whole story. There's so much more to that. What compounds the problem is there's also a little bit of pride taken in. I said you and I because I haven't forgotten what I learned in school. You don't say you and me. That's how I see it. That's an analogy for me of how I see that there's more to it. We can push through it, and truths you don't see. Don't cap yourself. Don't put a lid on your knowledge, because it can totally turn things around. It really did for me. And I'm no historian, but I enjoy learning, right? And Richard Bushman's Rough Stone Rolling about Joseph Smith was a really good one for me, even as I was coming back. And I know some people thought, oh, don't read this. There's too much information, basically, is what they were thinking. But it's totally different once you think of them as you and me, when you think of Joseph and those around him like you and me. All the imperfections, strangely, make me even more convinced that he's a prophet, given what he went, his flaws. Not only that, if God can accomplish so much through an individual like Joseph, and this is not to say all the charges against him are true. Some of them are. They have to, some are, lots aren't. Lots of unfair criticisms, but I'm sure there's a lot of legit stuff, right? But I've come to realize, or I've concluded, if God can accomplish so much through Joseph Smith, which is my testimony and my faith, wow, I guess that means that opens the door for all of us. It opens the door for me, because I remember being really hamstrung and handicapped by like all of us, my sense of inadequacy and unworthiness, as a teenage boy, and I can't be inspired. I can't pray. I'm not what I'm supposed to be. Well, of course you're not, but it doesn't matter in the most important sense, that God's still there, and God can still work miracles for you and through you for others. That's the lesson I take from all of his imperfections. And that's super compelling to me. It's super encouraging to me, and it's a cheerful message. So in a kind of strange, counterintuitive way, his imperfections reassure me. I don't know, comfort me and inspire me. And I know he was another Lehi or Moses or Abraham, making mistakes along the way. Can you believe it? I can. What kind of prophet does this, that, and the other? What kind of prophet has to zigzag? A real one, a mortal one. So that's been my message to again, the young people I talk to. Don't give up the pursuit, right? Not all information is accurate and true, and allow for that, but there's good information out there that can be helpful. And don't ever get to a place where you're so confident that you don't need to know more, right? That's where some of the most important information is, some of the most important revelations for you. So that's really a testimony without
I love it.
closing it in the traditional way, right?
Yeah, I think it reminds me of what Leo said in his episode. And he said, if God can work miracles through somebody like me, Leo, or me, Ashley, or me, whoever, like, he can work miracles through like people like Joseph. And so I think that's so incredible. And that the analogy with Mozart was so profound. That is such a great analogy. I love that so much.
Good.
So what advice would you have for somebody that is, in that place where you were, where you had the 1% of hope when you opened your scriptures, and it's like 99.9% is, hey, this is all baloney.
Yes.
And what advice would you have for somebody in that situation?
I have come to find that motion, being in motion, not sitting still, not closing doors, is the key to everything in life. And those who struggle with like mental health and depression, the worst thing for you to do is to stop, is to say no, is to close in on yourself, and close doors to possibilities. That's the way, that's the only way anything works. Not just God reaching into your life, but any good things coming to you, any happy experiences and opportunities and mental health and other things, and inspiration. You have to be in motion. And so for me, I would encourage them, first of all, and you say this, I'm sure you say this, we don't condemn, I don't condemn anybody who's no matter where they are on this. To me, in fact, it's encouraging that people care, right? That they care.
It's their journey.
Right? It's their journey. And
who they are, and gives them experiences.
Exactly. It's why we're here.
Right.
And we've heard this said recently, I don't remember if it's in conference or what, but questions are critical. That's how the church was restored, through Joseph's questions, right? And I intimately understand the heartache and the trauma and the struggle and the depression that brings on. But okay, so I don't dismiss anybody where they are in questioning and feeling hurt. I get it, absolutely get it. But my encouragement to them is just leave a little crack open. Never say never, I guess. Truly, I was, of all the souls out there, I was truly approaching, in my mind and my arrogance, approaching 100%. There is no way this is true. There's no way all this stuff around it isn't nonsense. Yet, I guess even for intellectual reasons, you got to leave a little crack open. And I'm stunned by God's long suffering. What's the noun for being magnanimous? I don't know how magnanimous he is, to reach in when we're so undeserving. I was not deserving. I was very prideful, very ungrateful, but I found a way, at least, to allow for that 1%. So, and you don't have to conquer it all in a day. You're not going to. For me, it didn't change overnight. There were some critical moments, as I explained, but I was willing to open myself that 1%, and then maybe 2%, and then maybe 3%, and so on. to maybe God is operating in my life. And it was hard to believe because I knew I wasn't worthy and I wasn't all those things that I thought you had to have sewn up when I was a kid. You have to have all that buttoned up, your ducks in a row before you approach God. That's just wrong. We know that's wrong. I should have known it's wrong. Nobody told me that. It's just how I interpreted it, right? There's that. Like I said, allow for the possibility of anything like that. Look for the good in things. I was so tired, just as a human being, I was so tired of being a wet blanket. The guy in the room who was a cynic and pessimistic, and even though I thought I was smart and got the upper hand, and it still doesn't feel good. There's still kind of a yuck to it, to having brought people down.
One of the things that we interviewed Terrell Givens, who wrote The Crucible of Doubt, and that's one of the things that he said, one of the pieces of advice he had was look for the good, look for the beautiful things in the world and focus on the positive and the good, amazing things out there, and not so much focusing on the criticisms and the, what if this and what if that, and, and assuming that people are out to dupe you. And he obviously said it a lot more eloquently than I am right now, but yeah, it was so profound. And so that's kind of what I hear you saying is focus on
again, it's kind of like a marriage too. Being right so often is not just, sometimes it's counterproductive, right? It's not as important as, again, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. I had trained my brain to look and, really the scientific approach. That's misguided in that arena. The other thing is for the individual is, for happiness, and kind of related to this, is look for the good in people and savor the good in people around you. And as I said before, I believe that my family, especially my parents and older siblings, served as kind of a safety net or a firewall for me, because so many people end up thinking, oh, there's malicious intent, or there's fraud, or I knew firsthand. I knew from these people. And as a missionary, I had an opportunity to spend time with general authorities and others that spend extended periods with them. They were authentic people. Say what you will. And during my 6 years, I thought that didn't change, but I just thought they were misguided. I just thought they were wrong, and maybe a little silly and naive in places. But I knew their hearts were good. And that really came out of my family, because they were just as good to me, if not better, than ever when I hurt them the most, right? And so look for that. Don't be so easily convinced that there's malice, or so often there's not. And so again, my family served as the prime example. And that's why I never took my names off the records of the church, my name off the records of the church, and never wanted to hurt them publicly, because I knew they're practicing their faith and their most authentic belief. I knew that was real. That's real. And I'm grateful I never doubted that. If I did doubt that, I understand where that would take me, where that would take you to real animosity and a real campaign to set the record straight, bring justice or whatever.
Yeah.
That wasn't the case for me, and I'm grateful for that. So if you can find a way to see the good in the faith, and some people do, a lot of people try that, I think. I see that too, I'm sure you do. They try. They just think they're silly and fooled, or, that's better than thinking they're out to deceive you. I don't believe that for a minute,
Right. Yeah. And that kind of leads me to my next question, which is there anything that your dad did that, helped you leave that door open for you to come back? Or is there anything that, as family members, we can do to, either leave the door open or just not encourage the door to shut, I guess you could say.
It's so important to have patience. Everybody knows that, but with respect to those that we love who are questioning and leaving. He had my mom, I haven't talked enough about too. She's amazing. They had just amazing patience and kindness and were gentle about it and accepting. As much as it hurt, it's so hard to be kind and gentle when you're hurt, isn't it? I mean, we all behave our worst when we're hurt. And the gospel is everything to them and my family, the rest of the family. But his example of long suffering, trying to be more like, the Savior and God the Father, is long suffering and patient. And so what he did, to answer your question, is held the door open for me, had that crazy, weird, but mature and wise optimism, knowing the following that I try to remind myself of constantly. When I try to remind myself of it constantly. When my heart aches to see adult children disbelieve and leave or whatever, and nieces and nephews and others. A couple things is we have to have faith and trust in God's goodness, like I described it before. At every turn, if our eyes are open to it, we will be amazed. But also, not only that, but to remember and remind ourselves, God has, we see parts of it, infinite love, and to a degree of patience, not sure how that works, but also infinite resources and infinite time. And we know in the scriptures what his work and his glory is. And Paul says in the New Testament somewhere that he would that all men and women be saved. So here you have these absolute, very clear objectives of God the Father and all his resources and his infinite time. And we get trapped into thinking about our mortality in these short, tiny time frames. I really believe the plan of salvation. I believe that he has all these resources, and he's going to see to it that all those who are willing, somehow, some way, are exalted to the degree they choose. And so I remind myself of that. He's got every resource in the world, and I know what he wants. It's on his timetable, and it takes agency, and we have to submit and choose it. And that's awesome. That's wonderful. And that's really encouraging for me, the big picture. So often we think, oh, they're lost in mortality. They're lost. Well, I believe, and this is my doctrine, so I'm trying carefully not to, this is just my sense of things. I think we all had to come, obviously we know this, we all had to come to earth for really good reasons, but our reasons could be slightly different. So that person you think is just totally lost, or he's getting all the experience he needed to get, or she here, but it's not lost. That's just all you see right now. Don't lose faith in that. The eternity is a really long time, and God's love is pretty massive and pretty enduring. I find that very helpful. The other thing, for those of us who get really discouraged and sad about maybe the numbers we think we see these days, for me, it's kind of paradoxical, but it's encouraging too, because this was always going to happen. We know we're up against the end of days, as they say. Who knows what that is? But things are hastening, and of course, people are challenged. Of course, people are stumbling. Of course, people are zigging and zagging. Part of that was always going to happen. That's evidence to me that it's crazy. That's true, that we're approaching. And again, this is against the backdrop of God's magnanimous, and it's all going to work out in his plan. And he loves every individual, no matter where they are, where I was 20 years ago, where this person I love is today. So it's evidence to me that we are where we're supposed to be, and things are happening the way they're supposed to happen, against the backdrop of them being in God's hands. And it's going to work out for them, no matter how much it kind of hurts us in the short term. Don't lose faith and hope. There's a far bigger picture than we can appreciate right now. But I have been assured in my heart, through the Spirit, I believe, that those I care about who are off the path, hope is far, far from lost. I mean, it's all there. It's working out. It has to work out in certain ways. Don't lose hope. Don't lose faith. Everything is possible. I learned that.
Yeah, I got a comment from somebody on Instagram, and they said, your podcast is giving me it's helping me to know that it's not if they come back, but when they come back. And I loved that. And it was
Good.
profound. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the podcast. This has been so amazing. And I know everyone's going to love your story and love to hear this. So thank you so much for taking the time.
I am very happy to have talked to you. I'm enthusiastic about this. Like you, I really want to see people see their light, see the light as they can, and as each of us can. And I'm very hopeful, and I want to encourage other people as well, as just like we discussed. So I'm glad. Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you so much.